Good morning. Welcome to Kosta Browne. I'm Paige, our Director of Hospitality, and we're just waiting a moment for Julian, our winemaker, to join us. So, looking forward to speaking about our single vineyard release. And I think he's coming. You can see it's a beautiful day in Sebastopol here. We're coming to you from the winery. Our interns have arrived this week, and they are working away to get us ready for fruit, which we're expecting to come in next week. And there he is. There's Julian.
Hello, how you doing, Paige?
I'm doing great. I was just saying our interns arrived this week, and we're getting ready for a great harvest 2024. So
Yep,
super
definitely.
excited.
Yeah. It's the winery is alive. It's bubbling with energy and youth and just a lot of cool energy coming out of the cellar right now. There's always a little bit of a down season before the harvest kicks off, and when you inject, 15 heart seasonal workers to the cellar, things get very exciting very quickly. Yeah.
And how would you say this vintage 2024 is looking so far?
So far, so good. I mean, everything is going smoothly. There hasn't been really any, major events that we've been concerned about. We always most concerned with the frost at the beginning of the season. Bud break went smoothly. We had a little bit of a warm June. We had a couple hot spells during the month of June. But since then, July has been like a really nice season. Not too hot. I mean, of course, it's warm in the summer months, but we've had really nice, cool mornings. I mean, just last week, I woke up to, not only just our typical fog in the morning, but like it was cold.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that it's been, we've had obviously a couple warm nights, but for the most part, things have cooled down really, really nicely. And I'm looking forward to a fantastic season ahead. Right now, the forecast is really nice in the next 10 days or so. And we have an average to average plus crop out there right now, we think. This is the time of year where we're kind of scrambling around to just fine tune where we think we're going to land in terms of our yields. And that's a really, really difficult task. It's a tremendous skill. And we've got an excellent vineyard manager in Matt Gehring who has that down, which makes things very, very easy for us in the cellar. Because when we think that there's, say, 6 tons in a certain block, we're always within, half a ton of that. And there's nothing worse than when you think there's 6 tons out there and 8 tons shows up, and then when you do that, 10 times in a day, your 45-ton day turns out to be a 63-ton day. And, that's a lot of more work and a lot more, your plans don't really work out very well. So that's kind of where we're going right now, finalizing our estimates, and then we're beginning to sample. So we're about a week out, we think, from our first pick. Things are kind of progressing for the most part as expected. Every year, there's always a surprise where every winemaker's like, this has never happened before. And so, this year, for us at least, we're seeing our lead Pinot block way ahead of the other Pinots that are usually typically right behind it. So typically vineyards like Moonshine, Juicy, Treehouse, those are typically our first 3 Russian River blocks to ripen. And they usually come in within a couple of days of one another, if not, on the same day. And right now, Moonshine is about 7 to 10 to maybe even 12 days ahead of the
Oh,
next
wow.
class Pinot. And that's interesting because it might even be harvested before our first Chardonnay. So usually we have, our first couple Chardonnay blocks coming in, and then we roll into the Pinot. And this year we might be seeing red before we see white. So that's kind of fun.
Exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we are here to talk about our 2022 single vineyards that are in release right now. So I guess talking about like harvest and vintage, like how would you compare, like looking back 2 years to where we are now? And
Yeah. So, 2022, I would say, to be honest, was a very similar year to what we're experiencing right now. I mean, the summer was smooth sailing. not a lot to talk about. You know, things changed quite a bit in 2022 when we had a pretty significant, you know, stretch of warm weather in early September, and that really pushed things forward into like high gear. And you know, and it was more or less statewide. So we had heat up and down the entire California coast, and that really accelerated the final, you know, yeah, the final half of vintage. I mean, we probably had, I would even say probably we picked maybe a quarter of the vintage before the heat set in, and that was over, you know, the end of the Labor Day weekend, so like the early parts of the following week. And so right now we're looking at a similar trajectory, but we just don't know what's ahead of
Right.
us. So we'll see what happens. I'm optimistic that again we have another good year ahead. But you know, when it relates to the 2022s, you know, we had a tremendous year once again. You know, one of the impacts of the heat is that a lot of times, you know, because the berries on a cluster aren't all necessarily ripening in unison, right? So you have a variety of different states of maturation depending on the location of the berry itself. So some of the lead berries on a cluster during that heat, they dried out and they actually kind of became a little bit more raisinated. And so we actually had a reduced crop in 2022 as a result of that heat. So that was kind of, you know, I would say a pretty significant bummer for everyone who had to experience that because, you know, growers, you know, they're getting paid by the ton, and in a course of, you know, 3 to 5 days, when you lose 15% of your weight on a cluster because berries are literally just falling off the cluster, that's pretty brutal. And then if, on the winery side, of course, we're expecting, you know, our estimates to come to you know, fruition. And you know, when you're getting a little bit less, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, like all of a sudden we're in a position of having a little bit less wine than we thought we might. So interesting dynamic there. But you know, in the end, really beautiful season. You know, just generally speaking across the board, wines are really nice. They're fruit forward. They're dense. They've got great concentration. They're like this beautiful texture, really nice weight. You know, I think on paper, the vintage itself, you know, I probably, you know, 2021 was a vintage in which we didn't really have any significant weather events at all during the season, but these wines are standing up to the 21s, which I am extraordinarily pleased with because I thought the 21s was one of the best vintages in a long time. So I'm pleased. I'm very excited that these are rolling out, and you know, most of these wines too were bottled, you know, starting in December and finishing up around April. So they've all had at least 6 months or so of bottle age, and they're ready to be enjoyed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been tasting through them this week and they're tasting fabulous. I think it's a really great vintage overall.
Yeah.
And for all of you who are thinking about visiting wine country, harvest is a really phenomenal time to come and visit. It's like the holiday season for us at the winery. There's so much going on and coming out of storage. And we are doing a really fun event this year that Julian is the star of. We're going to be doing a really fun lunch with an amazing cellar experience where you get to do some hands-on with the cellar team and Julian in particular. There might be some punch downs, some other fun activities. He's nodding at me like I'm crazy, but we're going to have a really great time and a chance for our members like you to actually get some hands-on experience with the 2024 vintage. So if you are interested in joining us, then that is on your member page. And I think really cool to see how the vintage progresses from the very beginning, like getting to sample the fruit and then going through and getting to actually taste the final product. So um, let's taste some wine, Julian. I think we have the sparkling to start with. So for those of you who don't know, we did start making a Blanc de Blanc in 2020, which is really, really exciting. So we have our 2021 releasing this year. So I'd love to hear, Julian, like about, you know, sparkling winemaking is so different than still winemaking, like what that's been like for you. And I know you and I both love champagne. So what brought KB to sparkling wine and all that
Yeah.
good stuff.
Well, gosh. So yes, we started making sparkling wine 2020. So and that was our inaugural vintage, and it was a small release. We only made about 250 cases, so the access was rather limited. And this year we made a bit more, and so we're really pleased to be able to offer it to more people. But yeah, the origin story to sparkling, the reality is that it started probably, you know, quite a while ago. Um, we've been wanting to make sparkling. We've been big fans of sparkling wine for a long time. And yeah, I remember actually we were really close to making a sparkling wine in 2015. And we were kind of gearing up for it, and we were getting really jazzed up and excited. And then all of a sudden, we basically we had a change of heart, and we said, you know what? We think there's more work to do on the Pinot and the Chardonnay first before we can go, you know, get into this whole other process. Because as you mentioned, sparkling wine is a very, very different winemaking process, and completely different from how you make Chardonnay, still Chardonnay, and obviously very, very different from Pinot Noir. So but we also had this vineyard, Kiefer Ranch. And a lot of people know about Kiefer Ranch, and they know about the Pinot Noir that we've made. We've made also some Chardonnay, or other people have made Chardonnay off of the ranch. But the reality is that Kiefer Ranch is a south-facing vineyard. It's really beautiful. It's kind of a gentle rolling hill, and then at the bottom, it's flat, and it's leading up to a creek. So it's a little bit of a riparian, leads into a riparian environment. Well, the sloping portion is the Pinot, and then the flat part, which is the other half of the vineyard, is all Clone 4 Chardonnay. And that is a sparkling wine clone. And for the majority of its history, it had been predominantly sold to wineries that make sparkling wine with it. So we've made still wines and bits and pieces of it that have gone into our 116, but for the most part, it's been a sparkling producing vineyard for the Chardonnay. And so, we had been on this vineyard for a long time. We were selling a lot of the fruit, and finally one day we decided it's time. It's time for us to make sparkling wine. We were pouring more sparkling wine, champagnes and whatnot, from our tasting experience as a welcome. We were, pouring champagne and sparkling wine at our dinners, and we were just like, it's time for us to do our own. And so in 2020, we made our first sparkling wine. And, I would say, when we set out to make the sparkling wine, we really wanted there to be a connection between our Chardonnay and the sparkling product. So we really made it in a similar fashion stylistically, but we made it, the difference is that you have to pick it a lot earlier. One
Good.
is that uh, it ripens late, right? So it's not a vineyard that you're making sparkling wine from by picking it early in the season before it gets ripe, right? That would be, if that were the case, there's a lot of sparkling wine being picked right now, for example. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's more perhaps a Chardonnay vineyard that's more suitable for still wine than sparkling, perhaps. I mean, that's debatable. Uh, but the Kiefer is a vineyard that we get a lot of beautiful hang time, and we're picking the Chardonnay from Kiefer about a third to halfway through our still Chardonnay season. So that means that our Chardonnay, like vineyards like El Diablo, Bootleggers, Zia Tony Ranch, those are all at like 22, 23 bricks. We're picking those. And meanwhile, Kiefer's at like 16, 17, 18 bricks. So it's way behind in its development. And so it's got longer hang time. You get more development of the skins, and longer hang time typically just produces a little bit more flavorful wine. And we have the chance to pick that and make a sparkling wine still at a early stage in its process, but a later stage in the season.
Do
Um,
you think, Julie, I know you and I both love champagne, like, and I know I'm biased, but I think both the 2020 and the 21 are exceptional. Congratulations. Is that similar to like what you see in France when you're looking at sparkling wine, or is that something that's unique to kefir, like seeing that slow development that's, allowing this beautiful texture and flavor in the wine?
Well, I think ideally, I mean, the reason why champagne came about, well, one of the reasons I just said that champagne came about in France, for example, is that it was a colder area, right? And the vines and the grapes never really reached full maturation. I mean, they would wait till, say, the end of the season, which would be end of September, early October, whatever it might be, and the grapes just still weren't ripe. And so as a result, they found themselves making wines that were much lower in alcohol, 10, 11% alcohol, but they were pretty acidic still. They were pretty tart. And over time, whether it was through, uh, you know, a mistake in the cellar, or, maybe they bottled the wine that had a little sugar left in it, and all of a sudden there's the fermentation kicked off in bottle. All of a sudden, there's like a little bit of effervescence. There's still a little sugar, and they're like, "Hey, this is pretty good." How did we do that? And so that's a way of helping balance the acidity, the tartness, the bevels, and the sugar. All those things kind of come together to make a really nice wine. So yes, in theory, the best sites are the sites that you can pick later in the season and still have that lower Brix. And when we say Brix, of course, that's just the concentration of sugar. And the concentration of sugar is directly relatable to the final alcohol. So
Awesome.
yeah, yeah,
And would you say like for the people who have gotten to try your 2020, like between the 20 and the 21, are you feeling a lot of difference? I know we did a little bit of a different dosage, but how did that, as
yeah.
we're building our sparkling program, how is that evolution for those two vintages?
I think that they are very similar, so they're consistent with one another in terms of their personality and their character, which I'm very pleased about. Um, there is definitely with all of our Chardonnay and our sparkling wine too, we're trying to kind of teeter on this really fine point of richness and, you know, uh, tension, right? And acidity. And we want to have the best of both worlds. We want a wine that feels really nice and luxurious and supple on the palate, but we don't want it to be one dimensional. We want it to have the other side of that, and to get both of those features in one wine is can be very difficult because typically it's kind of leaning on one side or the other. So I thought we did a really nice job on the 2020. It's beautiful. It's got richness that really you feel right away, but then it finishes nice and clean and crisp. And I think that the 2021 is, in my opinion, a little bit more precise. And that's just my way of saying that the wine has a little bit more finer, contour, perhaps. It is not as wide of a wine. It's a little bit more precise and narrow. Finishes a little bit cleaner and a little bit crisper. But you still have a really nice balance. So I think that if we're talking about a you know, the teetering, the 2020 might have teetered slightly on the richer side, and this one is slightly on the leaner side. But I think that the 21 is more balanced. So I'm really, really pleased with this wine. And like you mentioned, the dosage is slightly different. We split hairs here at Kosta Browne. We're very, very precise, and we just keep going until there's nowhere left to go. But the 2020 had 3.25 grams of dosage, which is the final sugar addition to the very end of the wine, and that is an extra brut. So that is like the driest categorization of a sparkling wine, next to natural, which is a no dosage. But yeah. So anyway, 3.25 is within. Sometimes natural sparklings will actually even have 3 grams of sugar in it anyway. But anyway, very small dosage. And in 2021, we only did 2 grams. And so we have a smaller dosage, but the presence of the sweetness and the balance is actually, I think, more integrated, and it does not feel like it's got less sugar in it. It feels like it has the right amount of sugar. And so, it's really all about just the balance between the acidity and the sugar.
Well, I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that. And if you guys want to hear more about sparkling, Julie and I will talk about sparkling all day long with you. We can get as nerdy as you want, but we did make some Pinots in
Mm.
2022 as well.
Yeah.
Um, one of my favorite things about the single vineyard release is that it really features, I mean, we have 14 different wines in this release. We're sourcing from all over. And I think you really can see the evolution of Kosta Browne. Also, so everyone knows Julian's 12-year anniversary with Kosta Browne was this week. So we're super excited to have that longevity and your
The
evolution with
gray
the
hairs.
brand.
Yeah.
You look very distinguished. So I think we wanted to talk a little bit about Gap's Crown, which, as big fans of KB know, has been kind of a stalwart of Kosta Browne for a long time. And Julian and I were talking about this earlier, but we're realizing those vines are 20 years old. You know, as Kosta Browne has aged, the vines have aged, the wine evolves. We keep learning and trying to pursue the best possible wine. And I think the 22 is, I mean, the Gap's Crown is always excellent, but super excited to see how it keeps evolving. We were talking about doing a vertical tasting and really looking at if you have Gap's Crown in your cellar, this is a great addition, and to kind of see how the wine has continued to evolve. Um, so that's how I feel about Gap's Crown. I don't know, Julian, if you have any, the history of us working with this amazing vineyard site, and it's such a great example of Sonoma Coast to me. Like this is Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sonoma Coast is a big appellation, but Gap's Crown is definitely one of the jewel prize vineyards in Sonoma Coast, and it's located in the Petaluma Gap AVA. And Gap's Crown is just remarkably consistent every year, and I love the fact that, in my opinion, I think Gap's Crown is a very versatile wine in terms of its ability to connect with consumers and the people who are experiencing the wine, because I think, for anyone that tastes the wine, it undoubtedly is a beacon of quality, right? And so people who don't necessarily, you know, have an appreciation or really a care to, or have lacked the opportunity to try nice wines, I think that they'll taste this and they would recognize it immediately. It just stands out because it's got this, it's a little bit of a bigger style wine. It's got tons of fruit, so it's jumping out of the glass. It's that which makes it approachable, and it's balanced. It's got, everything is very smooth about the wine. Then you taste it, and it's got a lot of volume, but it's balanced, and it's got great acidity. It's a, concentrated flavor, and I think it does a lot of all the things, right? I mean, it's a, like I mentioned about kind of reaching, and having an obvious higher quality. It also is a wine that I think undoubtedly, uh, it relates. It's relatable to people who like fine Pinot, like people who know fine Pinot Noir from all over the world. They'll taste this and they'll recognize that as like a benchmark California Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir. And then what I also like about it is that it stands up to, it's a bigger style Pinot Noir, and therefore for the folks who, they actually don't typically drink Pinot Noir, and they might think that Pinot Noir is, just lacking depth and power. This wine will prove them wrong. And it's not done intentionally. It's just the way it is, right? Every year it just is the same way. This is a Sonoma Coast vineyard. It's in a cooler site that's very windy, and it's always picked near the end of the season, just because it's just a later ripening vineyard site. And so the wine itself just has a lot of depth and a lot of concentration, and it's a fantastic standalone wine. So Gap's Crown, one of my favorite, one of my, year to year, if I had to choose a wine that embodied Kosta Browne, this would be it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing for Gaps Crumb for me is the balance. Like you have that beautiful fruit. So if you're looking for a lush fruit forward wine that's there, but the acid is there, the finish is there. It's a wine you can just drink. It's great with food. I think I saw a comment that it was the Swiss Army knife of Pinots, and I think that's a great, it's a Pinot for all
Mhm.
occasions. So yeah,
Very
it's
good.
really cool. And we've been
Yeah, it's a,
working with Gap since 2006. Yes.
I want to say it's been a while. I mean, I was just looking back. I know part of the vineyard was planted in '05 and I think '02. So I think that we are on some of the earliest, vintages of Gap's Crown. And then we purchased, a long-term lease on about 38 acres of Gap's Crown in 2013. So, and we got bits and pieces of the vineyard from the very, very top. We're the only winery that sources fruit from the very top of the vineyard. And then there's like a series of, benches basically, and we get fruit from every section of the vineyard. So that makes our wine particularly, I think, interesting because we have a lot of material to work with. We can, the blends change from year to year, and in the end, we're producing a remarkably consistent Gaps Crown year in and year out.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
agree. I think we might need to start a vertical tasting here at the winery for
for
hospitality,
Gaps.
for this wine in particular. Well, we're not going to taste all 14 wines with you today, don't worry. But we were kind of going over, some of our favorites from the vintage and in general. And, our first as a brand kind of foray out of the Sonoma Coast, Russian River area was into the Santa Lucia Highlands, which is a really, really special place for Pinot. It's a little out of the way. I think Julian can probably tell the stories a little better, but there's two really phenomenal growers there, Gary Francione and Gary Pizzoni. And we get to work with both of them on three incredible wines. And I don't know, Julian, if you want to jump into how we got to start working with them, what the rules are for working with the Garys. And they like to have a good time. So do we. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So Michael Brown and Dan Costa back in 2005 actually was the first time that they went and made a wine in San Lucia. And so actually we're coming up on almost 20 years of working with the same growers, and that is by far our longest tenured relationship. So really, really incredible that we're still working with them and have a great relationship. These two families are like the tip of the spear in terms of their viticulture acumen and their precision and their knowledge. Basically, they were also pioneers in the region, right? So San Lucia Highlands, they, weren't really growing grapes until the 70s or so. I don't know the story like precisely, but around the 70s, some of the first pioneers were there. Gary Pisoni was, kind of in that second wave, but still very much, you could probably consider it to be the first wave of grapes being grown. And he planted his first vineyard in '82, I believe. And at the time, it was Pinot Noir, it was Cabernet, it was Chardonnay, Merlot, many different varietals. And it wasn't until the early '90s where he really started to realize that the Pinot was the best grape to grow in the region. But where they had purchased their property up there, it's near the southern end of the Appalachian. It's higher elevation, and it's really rugged down there, and there's not a lot of access to water. So it was a small vineyard up until they struck their the California gold mine, which would be a well, and they started to expand their vineyard a bit around then. But since then they have skyrocketed along with the Franciones to the premier growers in San Lucia Highlands, in my opinion. And the Franciones started their first vineyard, I want to say in at least Rosello's was planted around 95, 96. They planted together because the Gary Pisoni and Gary Francione were really close friends growing up through school. But they planted their first vineyard together, Gary's in 1996, 97 era. And so, and they also worked together on another vineyard called Sobranes, which is co-owned as well. And then there's a Sierra Mar vineyard that is a Francione ranch as well. So between the two families, Pisonis and the Franciones, they're our exclusive partner down there. And when it comes to farming, these guys, they also are growing things other than just grapes. They're doing a lot of lemons, lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower. They're more than just grape growers, and you know they're precise. We go down there, and I swear, if there's like a leaf that is seemingly out of position, Gary would be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we got them all," and like pulling it off the vine or whatever. And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? This is this looks fantastic." And so they're very, very trusted growers, and we have a great relationship, despite the fact that they are about 3 hours south of Sebastopol. San Lucia Highlands is located 100 miles south of San Francisco in Monterey County. It's a really beautiful area. The bench, the vineyards are all kind of southeast facing, and it's a really, really beautiful, gentle slope at the foothills of the San Lucia Highlands mountain range. Just to the west of the San Lucia Highlands mountain range is Big Sur, so very rugged, kind of uncharted territory. But yeah, so the bench is this beautiful alluvial fan that's been like scarred with these really deep creeks and ravines, and so you've got this terraced benchmark topography that's really, really unique. It's really beautiful, and each vineyard that we work with is located at a little bit of a, well, certainly a different area along the benchland, but slightly different elevations, slightly different, or maybe very different soil types, and even the temperature and the fog and the wind. All these things have a big impact on how each of these vineyards, perform. And one thing I find to be very interesting, just generally speaking, about from north to south, north being Rosella's, and then Gary's, and then Pisoni, which are three single vineyards from San Lucia Highlands. The northern end is where the fog is, the fog kind of comes in most afternoons from the Monterey Bay, and it hits Rosella's first. And it takes about an hour at most to reach all the way down through the appellation. And then in the following morning, the fog recedes, right? So you can imagine that Rosella's is going to get the least amount of sun or, heat in a day, typically speaking. It's certainly compared to Pisoni because it's further south and the fog doesn't reach that till the very end. And then it's the first location to be exposed to the sun again. So there's definitely like a gradient of temperature, but not only that, Rosella's is positioned on a very gentle slope. It's got the most fertile soil in comparison to the other three. And then as you go further south, it just gets rockier and kind of thinner soils as you go. And by the time you're in Pisoni, it's a very thin soil, very rocky, very well-drained soil. And so that changes the character of the wines. And so we've got three different wines here. The first wine, Pisoni, which is the southernmost, and it's also the highest by far. It's like, I think it maybe 900 to 1400. It's up there, close to 1,000 feet elevation. And it's a really rocky, kind of rugged terrain with a lot of different soil types and a lot of different exposures. And so it's an interesting vineyard to be working in because every block can be a little different as well. And our block actually sits in a little bit of like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a little bit of like a ravine, low lying. And so there's actually an interesting sun exposure component to it as well, because the sun's coming up and it might be shaded for a little while, and then it gets like this beautiful afternoon sun. Very, very rocky granite soil. And so the wines tend to be a little firmer. They're definitely dark, concentrated, but a little bit more structured than the rest. And it's 100% Pisoni clone. And the Pisoni clone is a more of a muscular, broader version of Pinot Noir. So,
And how do you get a clone named after you, Julian?
well, yeah, you gotta find it, right? So he's got a great story, but Gary Pisoni basically imported some clones, some budwood from France, from Burgundy, from one of the most famous vineyards around. And he kind of, he brought it in the early 80s, I presume. And, budwood is interesting because you can basically cut out like the tip of a pencil, worth of wood, and you can bud that onto another plant material, and the bud will grow based on its origin, and it will use the vascular system of the rest of the plant as a means of functioning in terms of just providing water, nutrients, and all the different things. But you get the character of the original budwood. So he brought over, I'm sure, a bundle of it, and that is the story of the Pisoni clone, and it's a very unique clone, and it's unique specifically to St. Lucia Highlands. I don't think I've ever, not to say I don't think it exists, but I don't think I've ever had Pisoni clone anywhere other than from St. Lucia Highlands.
And all three of our St. Lucia Highland wines are made with Pisoni, right? I know there's a couple
Hmm.
other clones in the Rosellas, but
Correct. And I think that, in many ways, the Pisoni clone is a defining feature of the St. Lucia Highland wines. As you mentioned, Pisoni is 100% Pisoni. Gary is 100% Pisoni. It hasn't always been. We've actually had other clones in the past, but for today, 100% Pisoni clone. Rosellas, depending on the year, depending on how the blend turns out, but we do have Pisoni, we have 777, and we have 828. So that is actually the most diverse site in terms of its clones. And as a result of that, the Rosellas tends to be, one of the reasons why it's the most, of the three, right? Everything's kind of relative, the most elegant, right? It's got a little bit of a softer, corners, a little bit more floral. And so I think that's partially because you have the clonal variety as well as the cooling effect of the fog because it's further north. But yeah, all three are distinct. They're wonderful. And I think that Pisoni being the most structured and perhaps the most tannic, and like you can kind of feel the presence of the tannins the most. Rosellas is the most kind of silky, like I said, a little bit of a floral component, but softest. And then Gary's is if you could put the two Gary's character in, the best of both of them and put them together, I really feel like this wine embodies their personalities, right? It's just a tremendous wine. It has a presence. It's a wine, it's a wine that commands attention. It's it's a broader kind of feel. It doesn't really feature, like, you don't really feel the tannins like you would in the Pisoni, and it's got a much deeper character than the Rosellas, and it's just a fun wine. I mean, this is a wine that also when people drink it, I think they recognize it right away as like, oh, this is fun, like this is cool wine. What is this? And it's a very reputable vineyard.
and the finish on it, I just tried it. It's just incredible.
Mm.
I know Rosellas, maybe this is psychosomatic because I know it's surrounded by lemon groves, but I always get like a little more citrus on that wine, which I love, like just those little like kind of blood orange notes. But yeah, this is 22 is exciting.
Yeah,
I'm having fun trying these wines.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. 22 turned out to be a fantastic year. I mean, I'm couldn't be more pleased. The old adage of great grapes make great wine. I mean, we kind of learned that on day, like, winemaking 101, but it continues to present itself, and it continues to prove itself year in and year out, and especially on the tough years, right? I mean, the tough years are where the vineyards that are really good truly, they step up, and they just weather a lot of adversity. And and great vineyards come in lots of different forms. Some vineyards, not, for example, the ones that we're talking about here in St. Lucia, but some vineyards, when you visit, you kind of look at it, you're like, okay, these look like they're a little bit in rough shape. They don't look like a marquee vineyard, but they produce really good wine, right? And so it's just amazing how the site, and it's something that we just, I don't think there's any amount of explanation that we could truly, with confidence, convince each other or ourselves about. It's just a result, right? And it's just something that over time you recognize, and um, and it's proven time and time again. So that is this set of wines here that we're talking about in terms of SLH. It's a proven, high quality place. Um, you know, uh, of course, San Lucia Highlands is also located just west of the Salinas Valley, right? Or it's in this, yeah, it's in the Salinas Valley. But as you're driving through 101, you're kind of overwhelmed and consumed with all the bustling activity that's just like just to the left and right of Highway 101. I mean, it's where all the ag and all the row crops are being grown right there on the fertile valley floor, and you can smell it. I mean, you can smell, almost taste the harvest in your mouth when you're driving through. And so there's a lot of bustling activity. But if you were to look past that and towards the west, you would start to see these really beautiful benchmarks, or the alluvial fans that are kind of like gracefully drifting off of the mountain range, and kind of becoming part of the valley floor, and that's where the grapes are grown. So really beautiful area, and I recommend visiting the region, and at the very least paying attention on your next trip when you're driving through San Lucia or excuse me, Salinas to to see the vineyards.
You have to
So
look
really incredible.
for them. They're
Yeah.
hidden. It's like a
Yes.
little surprise off in the distance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really special area. Yeah, these wines are fantastic. What I think, I mean, also just wanted to mention for this release, I mean, I think our average case production on these single vineyard wines is around 400. Does that sound right, Julian? Like most of these wines are, pretty small lot. At fermentations, case production, you're taking a lot of care to really highlight these different regions and these really special places. It's such a privilege to get to work with so many different, like, phenomenal vineyards. I mean, you were just talking about, the history of both the Garys, which is incredible, and that we get to work with these, not just these vineyards, but the other wines that are in the lineup.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And we see eye to eye, which is great. I remember in 2022 specifically, uh, you know, Mark Pisoni, who's the son of Gary Pisoni, who's really the one who's, the, you know, Mark is an incredible grower of all things. He loves it. He loves, when you see him, he's always handing over vegetables, fruit, oranges, like cherries, like whatever is in season. He's like, I got something for you. I got something for you. He just loves that part of it, right? And he loves producing things. And it's not just grapes; it's just all things, right? But he's the one who's really the force on the ground on the Pisoni side of the family when it comes to the vineyards at this point, right? Gary's getting a little older, and his kids are taking over, and his other son Jeff is making the wine in Santa Rosa, and Mark is growing the grapes. But I remember in 2022, Mark calling me at like 3:30 in the morning, because that's when they're they I don't know when they sleep, because they seem to pick up my call almost always. But I know that they're always up at night picking, because all the grapes are picked, starting around say 1 or 2 in the morning, and they're on the truck by 4 in the morning. But he called me. He's like, "Yeah, Julian, I got a little room in the truck. I could squeeze in, your last 3.5 tons of Pisoni." And I woke up. When Mark calls me at 3:30 in the morning, I'm gonna pick up. As long as I wake up from his phone call. And sure enough, I was like, "Yes, I want it. Send it." And I just love that, because he is, they're both, the Franchiones and the Pisonis. They're so committed to quality, and sometimes it's you need to make a call like that on the fly, and there are eyes and ears on the ground there. And I was really glad that we grabbed those last 3.5 tons when we did, because the wine turned out like, we kind of nailed that last pick. But yeah, and then also we pick down there like surgeons, because you know our wood and concrete tanks. They're 3.5 ton capacities. So I like to fill those with all the single vineyards as much as possible, especially the smaller vineyards like Rosellas, Pisoni, Gary's. And so I pick in 3.5 ton increments. So sometimes if a block is only say 2.5 tons, I'll take 2.5 tons of, the lower Gary's, and I'll take a ton of like the middle Gary's. So I make a 3.5 ton pick. It sounds pretty simple, but in the middle of the night, and people are running around, you got headlamps and all these different things are going around, it's kind of hard to get that right, and they always do, right? Like when we ask for 3.5 tons, it's like within 100 pounds. It's crazy, and that makes my life really nice because then I can actually have a plan, and I can have a purpose, and I can do the things that I want. Whereas if it came in at 4.3 tons, an extra half a, I mean, you gotta imagine, like, there's like 3 or 4 rows being picked at once, right? There's all these bins and there's all this chaos because everyone's working as quickly as possible. And if one bin gets picked, one too many bins, or like a half a bin gets picked, then boom, the whole thing is thrown off. And it comes here, it's not the end of the world, but now we have to, put it into a different tank. Or maybe the winery is really congested in terms of its capacity, and we actually, don't have a home for it. That would be an extreme circumstance, but like there's trust, and they deliver beyond expectations every time. So I can't say enough about them as partners in making fantastic wine.
Yeah, I think it shows through vintage to vintage. When we taste through these wines or open an older bottle, there's just you can rely on it, which is always a really special thing in a wine to know whenever you open it, it's going to be fantastic, which isn't true all the time. So,
Yeah.
um, well, great. I mean, I think, is there anything else from the 2022s you want to highlight, Julian, before we bid our friends adieu?
Yeah, I would say in general, I'm really, really pleased with the wines that are being offered right now. El Diablo continues to be a you know a fan favorite in terms of our own staff. We're always very excited about that wine when it comes out. And this year is no exception. It turned out really, really good. And I think it's gaining a reputation as well with our members that of being a really incredible wine. So El Diablo is another great wine this year. And in terms of the Pinot, Giusti is turning out to be, another one of my favorite one. I mean, it's hard.
You can't
There's a
pick
lot
a
of great.
favorite.
I know
They're
it's
beautiful.
hard. Yeah, they're all good, but Juicy is really, really good. It's a fun wine because it's a warmer site. It's in Forestville, and Forestville is kind of in this area that it could be cold, depending on where it is. It could be warm. Generally, it's in this spot where, the sun will kind of bake some of these places quite well, and Juicy is a place where it gets real warm, but it's really close to the coast, so it cools off quickly too, and so you get a really extreme diurnal shift. You get low lows and you get high highs, and then it goes back down every day. And I think the wine feels like that, right? Like you get this like rush of fruit and flavor, and it feels like it comes up quick, and it's got all this tremendous power, and then it like it just zips through the palate, and it finishes really crisp and clean. I love that wine because it's got a ton of structure and depth as well. Kiefer Ranch Pinot is always a beautiful wine. It's got this gentle suppleness about the wine that's really got a white glove kind of feel. And Kiefer, you know, it's we've been making this Kiefer single vineyard for a long time, and it's a really tremendous wine. So that one's known to be one of our better wines. And then the we didn't really talk at all about Santa Rita. So Santa Rita, we made two,
Or Willamette.
yeah, no, right? A lot to keep track
Yeah.
of. But Santa Rita Hills, the Mount Carmel, and the Rita's Crown, both very different wines, incredibly different wines in terms of their proximity to one another. They share a fence line. Mount Carmel is kind of a little bit on a benchmark, and a bench, a benchland, and then right behind it is Rita's Crown, and Rita's Crown gets steep real quick, and we're kind of on the other side of a ridge there, and the Rita Crown wine is dark. It's purple. Like it's really dark, it's really purple, it's really concentrated, but it's balanced. It's got tremendous acidity. It reminds me a little bit of Treehouse in the sense that it's got that intensity of um, concentration, richness, and acidity and depth. And so it's got like all these really, really exaggerated, not exaggerated. It's just got like a lot of loud, everything's kind of turned up on Regis Crown.
Yeah,
And then Mount Carmel is a little bit more rustic, and it's got a little bit more earth, and it's got more, more elegance. So very different wines, really, really cool. And when it comes to terroir, an amazing study of terroir in
absolutely.
such close proximity. And yeah, and then there's Willamette Valley, right? So Willamette Valley, we're on our second vintage there. We're producing a Shea single vineyard for the second time, and an Eola Springs, which is a new wine. And as we're getting to know Willamette Valley a bit more and working with different regions and different sub AVAs, and of course, we got to try the wines from other producers and kind of get to know the the character of each sub AVA. Eola Amity has been a sub AVA that has, I would say, to be perfectly honest, at first I didn't really know as much about Eola Amity. I kind of knew the bigger hitters, Chehalem, Yamhill Carlton, which is where Shea is, Dundee, right? Those are kind of on the northern side because they just maybe carry a little bit of a, I don't know, stronger reputation. And the Eola Amity is this really beautiful,
It's so
really nice
great.
wine.
The wine is so
Yeah,
pretty.
and the Eola Springs came out incredible. Like a very pretty wine, but very, you know, very like intentional. Like
Mhm.
it has a presence. It's got like this really strong beam of light, which I think is really cool. And that's what we recognized in 2021 when we made the wine and it went into our appellation blend. We recognized that as like a tremendous force, a really strong wine. And in 2022, when we were kind of thinking about, well, let's pair up another one on the single vineyard tier, Eola Springs was obvious, the obvious wine that came to mind. So both of those wines turned out incredible. The vintage was very different in Oregon. It's kind of a long story, but the fact that we made wine out of there in general was a tremendous success because they had a frost in April of 2022. We didn't really know, no one really knew how things would respond, and everything responded, but it was late. And then it was a late season, and there was a storm that was kind of hanging on the 10-day forecast for a long time. I mean, I think every morning we were looking at our phones like, is this going to hit? Is this going to hit? It just stayed on the 10th day, the 10th day, the 10th day for a good week, maybe 2 weeks. And we needed those last 2 weeks because without them, it could have been it would have been a very, very tough year. And in the end, everyone picked all their fruit in the last 10 days or 7 days before that storm actually hit, because when it did, it rained for like 2 straight weeks and the temperature just dropped by 20 degrees. So really incredible vintage in Oregon. And yeah, uh, excellent additions to the lineup.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So quite a year.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're excited for this vintage. We're excited for 2024 that we're working on. If you didn't know, you can actually visit us here at the winery. Julian is here himself. We can say hi. Make an appointment. If you have any questions about this release or trying to figure out what you want to purchase from your allocation, we have a really phenomenal team on site that can answer any of your questions. So please reach out to us if you have them. And yeah, we hope everybody has a wonderful weekend and has some delicious wine to drink with it. So, cheers.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.